Hello everyone, welcome to my English Gems tutorial on Romeo and Juliet, and I'm going to be looking at the prologue. Now the prologue is really important as your starting point. I would advise that you just learn the prologue and it will get you through no matter what the exam question is, because the prologue is one of the most important parts of this play. It sets up all of the events that are going to happen. It introduces the themes. We understand this argument between this love and this conflict, the fact that we have teenage suicide, everything is there. And it's really important that you actually understand how this prologue works so that you can always come back and reference it. And that's the most important thing here, that you can always use the prologue no matter what the exam question, and by doing that you're actually linking back to elsewhere in the play, and you get marks for doing that. So let's make a start. I have my pen. You're going to need a pen, you're going to need highlighters, and you're going to need a copy of the prologue if possible. If not, you're going to have to pay a lot of attention. Here we go. Let me share my screen with you. So we're going to just start with, obviously, this idea about love and hate, conflict, the violence that comes throughout this play. And I'm going to do this in a bit of a backwards way, but trust me, it does make sense. So before we go any further, massive spoiler alert, that's what the prologue is. And lots of people say, well, why is it even there? What's the point of it? Well, the point of it is to basically, like a film trailer, tell us the key information, the best bits. And yes, obviously that's going to encourage an audience. They're going to know what to expect. They're going to know there's going to be love. They know there's going to be violence. We've got fighting in the opening scene. It's bringing together all of those ingredients and making them want to watch, the same as a film trailer would do. But I think the prologue does a little bit more than that, because the massive spoiler is that it tells you they're going to die, which again thinks, well, now I know what's going to happen. I don't need to watch it because I know that they're going to die. But actually, by knowing that, but not knowing how, and by knowing that their death of Romeo and Juliet ends this conflict, you then think, well, I want to know more. I need to fill in the blanks. And that's where the prologue is really effective at drawing that audience in from the very beginning. So if you don't know anything about Romeo and Juliet, this is a big spoiler for you. I apologize. Okay, so as we now look at the prologue, please never fear when you're looking at Shakespeare or poetry. There are always going to be words and things that you don't understand, and that's absolutely fine. But equally, there's going to be words that you do understand, that you do know, and that's what you want to play to, and play to their strengths, and talk about the things that you can talk about. This is going to seem a bit backwards, but I'm going to talk through for you the sections here. So we're going to start off with language, and then we're going to move on to talk about the structure, make sure you have a full understanding of actually what it's saying, then go to techniques, and we're going to finish with the themes. And we're going to do it in that order so you can realise that actually, if I can't think of anything else to say, I can always talk about words. I can always talk about the words that I know and the language that's been used, and that's really important for you getting those marks. So let's make a start on our language. Now this looks crazy, but as you can see, I've blocked out the back of most of the prologue. We haven't even read it yet, and I'm not going to read it to you yet because we don't need to, because we're just looking at words. And you'll see my key here is that we have love and hate. So there's two themes throughout this play of love and hate, and they're really obvious within the prologue. And if you can't think of anything else to talk of, well, you can see that the words that I've got here in red, they all connect to each other. They all connect to this idea of love and caring and passion. So we have this idea of our lovers and love and loins and things being fair. So we can see that there is love coming through the prologue, and is going to be in the whole of the play. But what's more important is that there seems to be, we look at the grey words, that's our hate. If we combine all of these together, there's far more conflict and hatred than there is love. just looking at the words there, you can see more hatred and love. We've got this grudge. We've got mutiny, which is this new style of fighting that's going on in the streets. You've got the image of blood. We've got fatal, people are dying. We've got enemies. We've got suicide, people taking their own lives. We've got death again. We've got this image of people being buried. So this really, really, really negative conflict to the point of it killing people. We've got this idea of fear. We've got rage. We've got death repeated again. And you suddenly realise that there's so much language, so many words that I could talk about before I've even read anything, because I can group those words together. We could call that lexis. We're bringing our lexis together, and we can see that throughout the prologue, we have got our language that links to the theme of love and links to the theme of hate and conflict. And we can also see from this that the conflict seems to be more important, or there's more of that than there is of the love, which is true. There is more conflict, there's more fighting and death than there is love in this play. So that's our language covered. Now, another weird screen, don't freak out. This is our structure. Really important, because we can get a lot of marks for talking about structure. So here, most important thing, it's a sonnet. What's a sonnet? Well, a sonnet is a poem written in a certain style, which I'm going to explain. And it's usually a poem that is associated with love. You could argue, why would Shakespeare start with a sonnet? And if we want our grade 7 pluses, we have to be able to not just go, oh, well, this is here. It's a sonnet. It's repetition. I'm going to throw some techniques out there. You actually have to say, well, why has it been done? What effect does it have? And I think for him writing this prologue, which seems to have more conflict than love, you get this idea of, well, if it's within a sonnet form, we've still got this underlying message of love. And although our two main characters die because of their love, he's still trying to make us realize that there is the parent strife, that ends the conflict, and then people can live in peace and harmony. So perhaps that message there is, yes, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of anger, but we have to go through that to get to our end peace. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why we have our sonnet. I'm just going to explain this to you in a bit more detail. So a sonnet will have 3 quatrains. So quatrains like every 4 lines. So you can see that we've got here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it ends in a couplet. We've got 2 at the end there. And that is just the structure. That's how they're laid out. So we can see from looking at this that we have our sonnet. We then can look at our rhyme scheme. And I'm hoping you know rhyme scheme, but ever so quickly, in case you don't, we're going to start off with A, because that's our first, the end of our first line. We've got A. Well, seen does not rhyme with dignity. So that will become B. But mutiny doesn't rhyme with seen, so it can't be B. Mutiny and dignity link. Unclean and seen link. And there we have our AB rhyme scheme. And it's the same throughout. However, when we get to our rhyming couplet, it doesn't match because they're separate. They rhyme on their own, attend and mend. And we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail as to why he then has this rhyming couplet, this lasting image. Couplet, couples, love, relationships. Everybody now lives happily ever after. So we end on that sort of positive note, and that's quite important. We could talk about, again, if we wanted to look at structure in our prologue and we really wanted those higher grades, we could talk about, in terms of here, we have remove and we have our pause here, and we're thinking we've got the hyphen. And actually what happens at this point is it changes. So the topic changes. We go from talking about the characters, the play, the events, and then it suddenly turns to us as the audience. This is what's going to happen on our stage. This is what you're going to see. If you listen carefully, we'll fill in the blanks. So actually this piece of punctuation here structurally is also really important because it shows us there's that change in topic, that tone changes ever so slightly. And that in a nutshell is the structure of the prologue. I hope you're still with me. Next section, we still haven't read it because we don't need to, because we're just analysing bits and we're understanding separate elements. No point in just reading it and going, okay, I read it, I've got no idea what it says. That's why we kind of have a bit more to it here. We're going to talk about understanding at this point, of just making sure that any words, any phrases that might not make sense to you do make sense to you. So we have our two households that are alike in dignity. So this idea of they've got equal status because they're alike, and their dignity is this idea of respect, that they're equal status. They have the same position in society, the same level of respect. So these two households, you can't really separate. That one isn't better than the other. And it's really important that we understand that from that opening line. We then move on to this idea of this ancient grudge. Ancient, very, very old, been going on for a long time. Actually, it's been going on for so long that no one even knows why they're doing it anymore, but we're all just getting involved anyway, because it's just what we do. And it seems a bit crazy, but we've got this ancient grudge. Grudge essentially was a problem or an issue, a harsh word that was said, that someone gets a grudge against someone for it. And what's happened here is this grudge, this bit of beef that one person's got because so-and-so said something about them, has grown into this huge mutiny, this conflict that everybody's getting involved in. And it's crazy when you just think about it, could have just come from, you know, an issue that someone had with somebody else a long time ago. It's just blown up to become this big thing. Then we have obviously our idea of new mutiny, which really confuses a lot of people, and it shouldn't. I'm just going to move myself over here because you can't see my writing. So we have now mutiny, which is the idea of a rebellion, of a revolt, and that people are, it's starting to change and become more than what it has been before. We've got a really big rebellion taking place that's involving, as you can see from the next line, the civil blood makes civil hands unclean. It's involving innocent people, families, all different classes. Everyone's now getting involved in this grudge. That's why it's a new mutiny. It's not just between that person that had a bit of beef with someone that said something that they didn't like. It's now become that people are fighting in the streets, they're choosing sides, and we're all getting involved. Innocent people are dying. Civilians, which moves me on to the next kind of line of this idea of the civil blood and the civil hands. And we're going to talk about civilians a little bit later on. Let's go back up there. And obviously we have our star-crossed lovers, which links to the theme of fate and the idea that their meeting was written in the stars. It was always meant to be. And there's the romantic love element that comes through at this point, but it's automatically then contrasted with the fact that they take their own life. So take what you wish from the star-crossed lovers taking their own life and how long they were actually together for, and really whether that love was worth it. Then we have, with their death, bury their parents' strife. So we can understand these lovers have met. Was it fate? Was it that they were supposed to be together? Now their misadventures, what they're about to go and do, actually kills them. They take their own life. But their death is what ends this conflict, this strife, this ancient grudge. So we want to link that strife is that grudge. So it actually took the children of the families to die for everything to end and be buried. And bury is quite an interesting image because we think of funerals and burying people deep beneath the ground and then we don't see them anymore. So it really does suggest that from their death, it's all over and people can move on with their lives. We can then jump down to this idea of the continuance of their parents' rage, which, as I just said, that with their children's end, naught could remove. So nothing else worked. Nothing else was ever going to end. And actually, you could then, if you really wanted to, link that to the idea of the star-crossed lovers and link that to the idea of fate. Perhaps they had to meet, perhaps they had to die because nothing else was going to work. And they had to die for this conflict to end because it was getting out of hand. And there's another thought. And finally, we have patient tears. So this is where I talked about with remove. This is where we had that almost like end break here of nothing else could end it, and the tone changes, and we have all of that story that I've just told you, all of that foreshadowing and that massive spoiler alert from my film trailer of telling you everything that's going to happen stops, because now I'm bringing it back to you. It's the 2-hour traffic of our stage drawing us in. I'm now talking with you. This is our stage, to which if you, with patient ears, so if you listen carefully, if you attend, if you pay attention, what here, and by here they mean this information, what we've missed out from what we've told you so far, we'll work hard, we'll strive to mend, we'll fix. We're going to fill in the blanks. So we've got 2 hours traffic on our stage, and listen carefully and we'll explain all the missing bits. So that's our understanding. So language done, structure done, understanding done. You've already got tons you could talk about, but I'm going to keep going. So, techniques. I've already said before that you don't really get any marks in your GCSEs for technique spotting, because the question is never what techniques can you find. The question will always be how. How has something been presented? How has the writer shown something? And when a question is asking you how, we have to identify the technique, but we also have to then say why it's been used, the effect that it creates, the impact that it has. So for here, I'm going to go just a couple of the techniques really quickly, just so that you can understand that explanation as to why it's there. So the first one I've got is civil and civil. So this idea of repetition. So we're repeating civilians. Now repetition is usually there to make something stand out. And you could put, yeah, the repetition is there to make something stand out. Make out the civilians that are important. Yeah, okay, why else? So then we have to think, well, actually there's a double meaning here. So we're going to explore this a bit further. Grade 7+. The double meaning could link to 2 types of civil. We could be thinking of civilians, the innocent people that are taking on board and starting to become part of this fight, and it's their blood that's being spilt. They're dying. So innocent civilians, people are dying as a result of this conflict. But the other meaning of civil is actually someone who is decent and well behaved, which totally contradicts what the action is that's taking place. Now that's quite important, because you could make the argument that because everybody's getting involved, of every status, from every kind of walk of life, we've got people who were once decent, well behaved, respectable people suddenly taking part, spilling blood, killing people. They're now unclean. So the grudge is so huge now that these decent people are killing innocent civilians. And that's where you hit those marks for talking about the repetition. Not just saying that repetition is there, but really extending how you talk about it. We're going to move on to another one. I'm going to have to move myself again. And this time we're going to look at the alliteration. Now for this is a nice one. So we've got from forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes. Now the alliteration sort of changes the image really here and the tone here, because we get this idea of, we're talking about the 2 households in that first quatrain, and then we move on to start talking about the lovers in the second one. And the alliteration marks that coming out of this, we have these 2 enemies. Coming out of the enemies, we have our lovers, which links to this foreshadowing of them taking their life. Again, we can argue that this is fate, which I've mentioned already. But essentially what we have here is teenage suicide, which is shocking for people that have known each other for like 5 minutes, but that's a conversation for another day. So we have foreshadowing here, which links in nicely to give us a little spoiler. And then we have this comment of the fearful passage, this fearful passage, the death marked with love. So we have the oxymoron. Oxymoron is when we have two opposites that are together. So we've got death and all the feelings and the emotions that come with death written right next to love and all the feelings and emotions that come with love. So that's our oxymoron, where you've got that contrast immediately side by side. And here is almost to present that death and love are these really powerful, omnipresent forces that are looming over this relationship the whole time. This is, again, our idea of fate, that they were never going to be anything more than 5 minutes and then die, because it was written in the stars. But that's that omnipresent, all-seeing, knowing, dark force that looms over their love. And we know, and the prologue is telling us, that from the moment they meet and fall in love, they're going to die. And all we're doing is waiting. When are they going to die and how are they going to die? So that oxymoron is quite effective there to make that stand out. And then we have the last section, which I talked about. As you realise, lots of this is now beginning to link to what I've already said. So here we have our metaphor for the play, the traffic on the stage, the patient ears attending, your ears are listening. And metaphorically, we're now saying, you know, this is what's going to happen. So in terms of our techniques, there's a fair few that we can pick out more, but I think that's enough for you to realise that it's not just about spotting a technique, it's about then saying, well, why has it been used? What's it for? What effect does it have? Is there, like the repetition, a double meaning, an alternative interpretation? Because alternative interpretations are going to push you really up into that top band. So there's lots of ideas there for you as well. And then finally, we have themes. And you'll realise, again, we still haven't read it. But we understand a lot of it. And now we're going to look at how the themes link here. So the theme of fate, the star-crossed lovers taking their life, which I've already talked about. The theme of love, which I did at the very beginning with language, linking our words together to realise that there's a theme of love coming throughout this play. Again, the conflict, which we did at the very beginning with the words, grudge, mutiny, foes, fatal, death, rage. Conflict is one of those key themes. And then family honour. And that one links up here to this idea of this ancient grudge breaking to be mutiny. That people honour the families so much that they're willing to kill and die in order to honour that family. And that's quite a big theme, a really important theme to talk about. And then finally, this idea of relationships. Now, there's lots of relationships that you can talk about. Relationships between Romeo and his friends, relationships between Juliet and her parents, Juliet and the nurse, Romeo and Juliet is the most obvious one that we're talking about here. The relationships between these civilians almost, and the fact that their relationship doesn't have to be a positive one. They have a relationship because they're choosing their sides. And suddenly you'll realise that this prologue has so much in there that you can talk about. So finally, I'm going to read it to you. And I'm hoping, as I now read this, it's going to make a little bit more sense. I'm hoping that you realise that you can follow this and you can pick out the themes. You can hear those words that are important, that stand out. And I'm hoping that the prologue now is so important, you realise how important it is. And before I start reading, just in case you don't know, because I don't think a lot of people tell you this, we have to read punctuation to punctuation. It's the same with poetry. It doesn't work otherwise. So I'm going to read it punctuation to punctuation, and you'll hopefully realise that it makes a hell of a lot more sense. Okay. Two households, and both alike in dignity. In fair Verona, where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows do with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, but their children's end, naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. The which if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. And that, folks, is the prologue. And that's me done. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions, please let me know. If there's anything that you would like me to do a video on, if there's something you're really, really struggling with, please let me know. Subscribe, like, share, do your thing. And yeah, I'll see you for the next video, hopefully.